December 20th, 1944. A frozen clearing in the Ardennes forest. A German captain named Otto Hullmann crouches behind a snowdrift with field glasses pressed to his eyes, watching something he cannot explain. 200 meters across the clearing, 12 American soldiers are pinned down behind a railway embankment. He has counted them. He knows their officer is dead. He watched the lieutenant fall 30 minutes ago, cut down by his unit's milligram 42 fire. By every rule of war Hullmann was taught at the infantry school in Dobritz. Those 12 Americans should now be retreating, surrendering, or huddled exactly where they are, waiting for a new officer. Instead, they are moving. 2 have crawled into a drainage ditch. 3 have shifted left and are firing into the woods on his right flank. A sergeant has crawled the other direction and is gesturing to a barman taking up a new firing position 20 meters away. Nobody is shouting. Nobody's using a radio. The lieutenant is still dead. And yet the squad is reorganizing itself into a flanking ambush aimed precisely at the German machine gun nest that just killed its officer. Hullmann lowers the field glasses, turns to his runner, a 19-year-old named Karl, and says something German officers in 3 other engagements that same brutal week are saying almost word for word. Verflixt noch mal. Who is commanding these men? Karl does not have an answer. Neither does the captain. Neither by January of 1945 will any of the senior German generals gathered in secret at a converted English country house north of London, where British intelligence officers are recording every word without their knowledge. Because the question Captain Hullmann whispered in the snow is the question this entire investigation turns on. The Wehrmacht invented decentralized command. The doctrine had a name. Auftragstaktik, mission tactics. Tell a subordinate what to accomplish. Never tell him how. Germans had trained their officers in this idea for more than a century. They had built the most flexible command system on earth, used it to conquer France in 6 weeks and pushed to the gates of Moscow in 5 months. And by the autumn of 1944, when their own captains watched American squads operating without visible orders, they could not understand what they were watching. Not because the Americans had done something the Germans did not know how to do, but because the Americans had done something the Germans had quietly stopped being able to do. Part 1. The American small unit initiative that confused German officers in 1944 was in its bones a German idea. October 14, 1806, Napoleon destroyed the Prussian army at the twin battles of Jena and Austerlitz. 25,000 Prussian casualties. The fortress at Magdeburg surrendered without firing a shot because its commander could not get authorization from a king who no longer effectively existed. The Prussian officer corps made one of the most consequential observations in military history. They had been trained to wait for orders. Napoleon's officers had been trained to think. The men at the center of rebuilding were Gerhard von Scharnhorst and his protégé Karl von Clausewitz. They tore the Prussian army apart and rebuilt it around a different principle. War is chaos. The plan never survives contact. So give the man at the lowest level a clear understanding of what his commander wants accomplished and let him figure out how. By the time Helmuth von Moltke the Elder took command in the 1860s, the system had a doctrine and a name. An order, Moltke wrote, that can be misunderstood will be misunderstood. Therefore, do not give detailed orders. Give intent. There is a story every German cadet learned. Prince Frederick Charles was berating a major for a tactical error. The major protested he was only following orders. The prince replied, "His Majesty made you a major because he believed you would know when not to obey his orders." That is the heart of the tradition. By 1933, this doctrine was codified into Truppenführung, troop leadership, which remains one of the most studied military documents ever written. Initiative is the duty of every officer and every NCO. Hesitation is a greater sin than a wrong decision actively taken. When France fell in 6 weeks in May 1940, the world saw what Auftragstaktik could do at its peak. This was the German Army Americans first met in February 1943 at Kasserine Pass. The result was the worst single defeat the United States Army would suffer on the Western Front. 6,500 men lost in 5 days. More than 200 tanks destroyed. The Wehrmacht referred to American troops as the Dollar Army. It was not a compliment. 18 months after Kasserine, in the hedgerows of Normandy and the snow fields of the Ardennes, German captains would stare through binoculars at American squads and could not figure out who was in charge. What had changed? Part 2. Omaha Beach. 6:30 in the morning. June 6, 1944. The first wave of a company, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division. Within 10 minutes of the ramps dropping, the company had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Every officer was a casualty. Every sergeant was a casualty. By every German calculation, what should happen next was simple. With its officers dead, the unit collapses. That is not what happened. What actually happened along 5 miles of Omaha is one of the most extraordinary collective acts of small unit improvisation in the history of warfare. In groups of 2 and 3 and 5 and 10 with no orders, no plan, no contact with anyone above them, they made the same decision independently. They decided that someone had to lead and the someone was going to have to be them. Sergeant Lewis of the 116th was lying in the shingle when a lieutenant named Leo van der Voort stood up and said, "Let's go, goddamn, there ain't no use staying here. We're all going to get killed." Then he ran at a German gun emplacement and threw a grenade through the embrasure. He did not consult anyone. Brigadier General Norman Cotter came ashore in the second wave and started organizing leaderless men by sheer force of personality. Finding a knot of Rangers, he said the words that became the Rangers' motto, "Rangers, lead the way." Lieutenant Colonel Max Schneider diverted his entire Ranger battalion 1,000 yards east to a less defended sector on his own initiative, saving probably 400 lives. He did not ask permission. But the part that should make you stop and think was not the generals. It was the privates. Private Carlton Barrett, 25 years old from upstate New York, landed in deep water under fire, dropped his rifle, and spent the rest of the morning swimming back into the surf to drag wounded men ashore. Nobody told him to do it. The chain of command around him no longer functioned. He would receive the Medal of Honor. In another sector, an unnamed private from F Company stood up and said, "They're killing us here. Let's get inland and get killed." He started up the bluff. Other men followed. By the time they reached the top, they had improvised an assault force out of riflemen who had been in 3 different platoons that morning, answering to a private who had not been a leader an hour earlier. Part 3. July 1944. The hedgerows of Normandy. German junior officers kept describing the same phenomenon. They would set up a machine gun nest, take fire from a flank they could not locate, shift to engage it, take fire from the other flank, and find themselves cut off from the rear by a third American group that had infiltrated behind them. The Germans kept reaching for the same word, improvised. Sometimes the squad leader was making the call. Sometimes a corporal. Sometimes a private who had spotted an opportunity and acted without a single word from his sergeant. Sergeant Curtis Cullen, a 29-year-old liquor sales promotion assistant from Cranford, New Jersey, with no engineering background, listened to complaints about Sherman tanks exposing their bellies climbing over hedgerows. A soldier from Tennessee named Robert said half-jokingly, "Why don't we put saw teeth on the front and just cut through?" Cullen did not laugh. He salvaged steel from German beach obstacles, cut prongs, and welded them onto a Sherman's bow. On July 14th, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley watched a Sherman drive through a hedgerow at 10 miles an hour, belly hidden. Within 11 days, approximately 500 Rhino devices had been welded onto American tanks. A liquor salesman with a welding torch had solved a problem an army group had been throwing battalions at for 6 weeks. The American military system had almost by accident created a culture in which an enlisted sergeant felt entitled to solve a problem himself and then demonstrate the solution to a 3-star general. It did not come from a manual. It came from a country that had spent 150 years telling its young men they did not need permission. Volunteer fire departments, pick-up baseball games, farm boys running combines since 14, auto mechanics who dismantled Model T engines on kitchen tables, construction workers who built barns in 2-day raisings without architectural drawings. Solving problems without asking a superior was not a special talent. It was a national reflex. The German youngster of the 1930s had been raised in a society that valued obedience as a moral virtue in a state that spent a decade telling him the Führer thought for the nation. His Auftragstaktik training was a doctrinal overlay on a cultural foundation that was the opposite of what the doctrine required. Part 4. By mid-1944, the Eastern Front had eaten the experienced officer corps. Roughly 3 million casualties in Russia by D-Day. The men who died first were the men who led from the front. Auftragstaktik demanded leaders who led from the front. So Auftragstaktik was killing its own practitioners. Then there was Hitler. By 1944, he had personally taken control of operational decisions down to the battalion level. The no withdrawal orders. The firing of any general who showed independent judgment. Manstein, Rundstedt, all dismissed and recalled and dismissed again. A German divisional commander could no longer be confident that initiative would be rewarded. The safer choice was always to wait for explicit orders. The system had become the opposite of what its doctrine required. As the German system grew rigid, the American system grew flexible, not on purpose, but because their men kept doing things on their own and getting away with it. On December 22, 1944, in Bastogne, surrounded by 3 German corps, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe received a written ultimatum demanding honorable surrender within 2 hours. He read it and said, "Nuts." He wrote his official reply to the German commander, "Nuts." The American commander. The Germans did not understand the reply. The American officer had to explain it was an emphatic refusal. They had encountered the American command system at full power. Part 5. At Trent Park, the converted English manor where British intelligence recorded every conversation between captured German generals. The transcripts reveal what those men actually thought. One general said American prisoners were individuals. They had opinions. They argued. They made jokes about their officers. Yet on the battlefield they fought with an instinct for the situation he had never seen in his own conscripts. A panzer commander described an American tank platoon. For tanks, no officer, only a senior sergeant, that outmaneuvered an entire German company with moves that had no military logic he could identify but worked anyway. He said the Americans seemed freer. A third officer was blunter. The German army had taught for 100 years that an officer's job was to think and a soldier's job was to follow. The Americans had broken this rule and were winning because of it. It does not appear in any post-war memoir. Verdict. So here is the answer to Captain Hullman's question. Who is commanding these men? Nobody and everybody. The Americans had absorbed the intent of their commanders so completely that they did not need to be told what to do next. They were the doctrine. Each one was both commander and commanded. The honest verdict is the American army was not individually better than the Wehrmacht. The average German rifleman was probably a more skilled tactical operator. The German officer corps had a longer professional tradition. What the Americans had was the more dangerous system. A war-built officer corps with no time for hierarchy, a soldier base raised in a culture of independent action, and logistical depth that gave foxhole improvisation real force. Captain Hullman is fictional, a stand-in for several real German officers who recorded almost identical observations. The clearing is real. Carlton Barrett was real. Curtis Cullen was real. McAuliffe's reply was real. Van Devort was real. Max Schneider was real. Most of their names are not in the textbooks. The Germans in their secret transcripts never quite worked out what they were watching. They reached for words like free and individual and instinct, and all were pointing in the same direction. The man in charge of those men was the man on the left of the sergeant and the man on the right and the sergeant himself and the private with the bar and the rifleman in the drainage ditch. None of them outranked the others in any way that mattered. All of them outranked the situation. That was the secret. The Germans never broke it because there was nothing to break. There was just 12 men who had been raised long before they ever put on a uniform in a country that had never taught them how to wait.